This is the Nebraska Broadcasters Association History Project. It's a look at the people and personalities who have made Nebraska radio and television what it is today. Today we are recording at the television facilities of UNO TV in Omaha. For the NBA, I'm Neil Nelkin. When we talk about sports broadcasters in Nebraska, we come across many who have been involved for a long time when it comes to sports broadcasting in Nebraska. It's unusual still to reflect on a career that has been decades in the making, not just years. Been a part of the sports broadcast community for nearly 5 decades here in the Omaha area. Jim Kelter has been reporting on Omaha and Nebraska teams for as long as most of us can remember. And we want to welcome Jim to the History Project. Jim, good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Legendary Omaha sportscaster. You've pretty much seen it all.
I don't think my tenure is 5 decades, might be 5 years, but I was in the business for 5 decades.
Well, that's what matters.
Exactly.
You are one of those guys that has stories to tell that some of us haven't ever heard, some of us have heard and forgotten. But give me a rundown briefly about how you came to sports broadcasting in Omaha.
Well, I started a long time ago. I actually started in grade school trying to prepare myself. Listened to a legendary guy. Everybody knows Lyle Bremser. We had one in Des Moines, Iowa, Jim Zabel, who was legendary. He did football, basketball. He did a prediction show on Friday night, and he did a bowling for dollars type show. And I used to listen to his play-by-play at night, and then at 6th grade, I would shut it off and try to mimic him. And so I had the bug, I knew where I wanted to go, and I ended up at the University of Iowa.
Did you have tape recorders back then when you used to do an impression of Zabel?
What's a tape recorder?
Exactly.
Well, it's amazing the things that we had back then. You wonder how anything got done. I mean, everything, and of course, even in my tenure here, we didn't have live television. You know, so if we did a game on site, it was some of it was recorded elsewhere, which brings me to one of my faux pas. We were doing the Creighton Marquette game. Al McGuire, legendary coach. And so at halftime, we inserted the interview we did, recorded, with Mary Higgins, who was the women's athletic director. And Title IX had just come into play. And I said, Mary, after all the years and all the fighting that's been done, we finally have women involved in sports. And I said, what's your feeling? She says, I think it's great. She said, it's a step in the right direction. And I said, well, that's good, Mary, because, you know, for the last several years, you women have been taking it in the shorts. And there was a cut. We're going to have to start this one over again.
You didn't let that run?
No. And, you know, the little things that come up spontaneously turn out to be pretty darn good. And
the most memorable.
Yes, exactly. And of course, you know, can you imagine doing something like that live and hearing that type of comment?
Well, today it would get you a suspension at the very least.
That's exactly what happened. But we had, when I came to Channel 3, they had pretty much cleaned house. The ratings were not good. And I think the coup de grace was when Dave Blackwell left. There was another big name in Omaha sports, one of the finest and the funniest guy in the world. And he came back for a couple of sportscasters banquets, and he came back in '84, and I said, hey Dave, why don't we go down to the Sugar Bowl together? He said, right on. So we go down to the Sugar Bowl, and we got our camera, and we're flying down with a team plane, and we get down there, and they're entering our final descent into New Orleans, and Blackwell says, hey, get the cameraman up there, you go up there with him, and then when they land, we'll go downstairs, and I'll do the interviews, you just sit back and watch. It's fine with me. So I said, but we're going to interview everybody? He says, yeah, because what they say next week will be the same thing they say now. You know, we put our pants on one leg at a time.
Coach speak.
Yes, so we did the interviews, and he says, here's the microphone. I'm going to be out at the racetrack all afternoon, and then at night I'll be at Bourbon Street if you want me. So about 12:30 that night, we went looking for him. He comes out of this bar, drunker than you can imagine, wrapped himself around a street pole, and is nose to nose with a mounted patrolman The horse has blinders on. And Blackwell looked at the horse and said, Jesus Christ, if I'd known you were working nights, I'd have never bet on you this afternoon. And so you can imagine the cop almost fell off the horse laughing and said, just get him back to the hotel room.
Get him back safely.
So, and that type of spontaneity, I probably would have thought that line 2 days afterwards. But Blackwell was just that kind of guy. He was just amazing at some of the things he could come up with on the spur of the moment. That's why they came back and paid him good money to do those banquets.
Give me an idea of who you worked with at KMTV back in those days. Who would we remember?
Jeff Jordan, Cal Kirshen, and I can't think of her name, but it started with Carol Scott. And for some of the younger people that don't know, Carol had a couple things going for her, both of them in her upper chest. And so she generated a lot of viewership, and we proceeded to move to #1 in the rankings. And I was invited out to do a speech with Lee Stevens, who was my competitor at Channel 7. So I did my little spiel, and I said, I know that you probably came more to hear Carol than you did me, so Carol can come up. And the guy at the MC said, yeah, we know her, the one with the big mammary glands.
Oh.
And of course, that made her mad, and she said, she said, I've been doing some of these things, and I don't appreciate those type of comments. But she says, because I've never heard you guys compare Jim Kelter's penis to Lee Stevens' penis. And again, you would think there would be roaring laughter, but these guys were pretty serious.
Until they got back to their office.
Until they got back to the office. So that's just an indicator of some of the things that happened. We had Dave Weber was still around at that time, just getting started in the TV business. He was in radio for a while. Of course, Jack Payne, legendary sportscaster. We had a lot. John Nicely was a backup
Sportscaster.
and he moved to St. Louis and started in news down there and hated it. So he came back, and we're talking the 70s, he's still doing. And he still looks like he did in the 70s.
These guys never age.
He has never changed. He's just a great guy.
For the younger people watching this, just be advised that we come from a different generation.
We can say things back then that we can't now.
We come from a different generation, so hold your emails and special comments regarding some of the things we say, because it was a different time back then.
Well, it was, and you spoke a little while ago about suspensions.
Mm-hmm.
We were doing a game in South Dakota. UNO was playing the Coyotes in football, and South Dakota led most of the game. The last 3 minutes, UNO went down the field and scored and got the lead. And my color guy said, he said, what do you think's going to happen here on this drive? I said, well, first of all, South Dakota's going to pass. Second of all, they will not call a holding penalty. I can tell you that right now. So first play, defensive end comes in, gets his jersey ripped off. This is back in the tearaway jersey days, and no call. So second play, guy comes through on a blitz. They take his helmet off, and he goes to the ground. Still no call. And the color guy says, he said, you were right about the holding. I said, yeah. He said, I haven't seen this much holding since the senior prom. And when I came in Monday morning, they said, you're suspended. And again, you wouldn't say that nowadays. You would find a different way to get that message across.
Television was a whole lot different back then. It was a lot more friendly, a lot more camaraderie. It's much more formal today, isn't it? Yeah,
it really is. And it's really strange. It's kind of like, and I think, Neil, you know this probably better than I do, but they say you spend your whole life in broadcasting trying to learn how to talk normal. Because a lot of times people, get into that formal stage and try to make an impression about how cool they are. Well, we loved throwing stuff back and forth, and I think it made for a better broadcast. And the story that I got a kick out of was at one of our competitors. There was a very, very nice looking lady and the sports guy would give her a lead-in to the show, what his top story was. Mm-hmm. And it was Dave Weber, and Weber wrote down, Sugar Ray Leonard has knocked out another opponent. And so he handed it to her, and she says, well, Dave, I see where Sugar Ray cooed somebody tonight, being K-O apostrophe D. Mm-hmm. And they got a kick out of that one because it obviously showed her lack of knowledge about the sports business.
But it also humanized her a little bit.
Well, sure it did,
yeah.
And I think that was the idea.
Those were the days of happy talk news. Everybody kind of got along. You all wore the fancy blazers.
Sure.
You all looked great.
I still have the leisure suit that I wore back then, believe it or not.
Still fit?
And how about the Nero jacket?
Oh, yeah.
I remember that.
Wore those on TV?
Well, yeah, one of them, they glowed in the dark.
Oh, Lord.
They were really bad, but
It's
we
a lot
liked
more
it.
today, a lot less friendly.
It is more informal because you don't see a lot of the sports guys, in a leisure suit or,
It's a good thing.
golf. But, why not? That's what sports is all about, I think anyway.
So you don't always see them wearing jackets and ties.
Very true.
Of course, back then you used to see the coaches all wear jackets and ties back then, too, on the sidelines.
Yeah. Well, and of all people, Dr. Tom Osborne, I did the Osborne Show for 6-7 years, and he, everybody says he's very dry, but he does have that dry wit. And we were doing a game in 77 in the Blue Bonnet Bowl, and Mark Almond at Channel 10 in Lincoln was our co-host. And we're standing around talking with Tom, and across the field he spots a cameraman. And it was Bob Bruce, who worked for Channel 6, sports guy. And Tom says, "Who is that?" And Tom says, "Well, Mark, that's pretty boy Bob Bruce." And Tom said, "Well, that's one thing they're never going to call you, Mark," because he had the gold chain like Woodstock and the whole thing. And I got a kick out of him because
Mark was a pretty hip character
yes,
back then.
yes, he was. It looked like a flashback to the 60s.
Looked like Mr. T.
Very good. I like it.
Then you moved on from Channel 3, and you came to work with K-Car Radio back then, which was 1290 or 1180 back then.
Right.
And you did a lot of work there in sports sales, sports packages, play-by-play, kind of did everything.
Yeah, we did about just about anything you can imagine. Of course, back then there weren't a lot of broadcast people doing it. I mean, like FM music, they would never even consider doing something like that. Now you see that happening all the time. And we did, when I finished at K-Car, or MediaWorks was a company formed by John Mitchell, the owner, and they started doing audio streaming.
This is when the internet was just getting started.
Just getting started, and hardly anybody knew about it. And they would come up to us when we were doing a game, and they said, "What channel?" I said, "It's not a channel. This is on the internet. It's a website."
What's that?
And they said, "Well," I said, "By the way, don't you listen to music on the internet?" And they said, "Well, of course." Well, it's the same thing. You go to a website, and you dial it in, and you can listen to the entire game. Plus, we archived it, so you could go back a week or two or 6 months later and go to that particular game.
These are high school games.
Yes. And one of the games we did was a Bellevue East and Creighton Prep game. And the Bellevue East guy hits a 2-run homer in the bottom of the ninth to win it. And 3 days later, we got a message from a guy who was overseas, like during Desert Storm, whatever war they were fighting at that time, saying, "I was up at 3 a.m. and caught my son hitting the home run." And that makes everything worthwhile to me.
That gives you the feeling
It
that
really
what
does.
you're doing is
Gives
valuable.
you a really good feeling.
Yeah. And we used to get a lot of that type of communications back in the day from overseas because of the internet just breaking out and making it available to troops overseas. Today it's taken for granted.
Oh, for sure.
But back then it was kind of unique and different.
But I'll tell you one that, and you probably know this in the preparation. We've talked about some of the guys that we know, Kevin Kugler, and all the homework that they do behind the scenes. Well, we did a game at UNO with Northern Colorado, and their sports information director will come over and ask you anything you need. I said, "No, I think we're good." Any pronunciations? I said, "Well, yeah, there is one. Please tell me that number 25 is Randy Seaman, or Seaman." He says, "No, it's Seaman." I went, "Oh my God." So I told my color guy, "This guy won't start, but when he comes in, I've got to pronounce his name. I don't want you giggling and giving this thing up." So it was a power of suggestion, I think. So here comes number 25, Randy Seaman, into the ball game. So I'm doing the play-by-play, paint the picture. Randy Seaman has it out front. Randy Seaman dribbles, he penetrates, and he scores. Guess what? Another suspension. Things you can't get away with normally.
You spent a lot of time in the penalty box, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. You've worked with some great guys over the years, but one fellow we both know quite well You spent a lot of time doing high school games with Tom Corator.
Yes, I did.
Everybody that's worked with Tom has stories.
They all do.
I'm sure you do as well.
I do. And Tom is one of those guys that he loves being on the air. He can't spell preparation, so he would just to get out there and be there was all it took for him. And he's legendary in some of the things that he would come up with. He showed up one. I think I've talked to you before about this. We were in Des Moines doing a game, and he's down on the court. We had a remote, but we didn't have the connection sound wise. So I said, don't ever take your eyes off me. So if I need to go down there, if you can wave, then I'll send it down to you. And in the middle of a key moment, he's waving like crazy. Well, this will be lost on a lot of the young people, but that was back in the days we had girls basketball in 2 states, Tennessee and Iowa. And they had rounded backboards. And he said, well, we go down to Tom. What do you got, Tom? Thinking I'm going to get a quote from the coach. He said, Jim, have you looked at the bank boards? They're square. They're not round. That's the highlight.
That's what shocked him.
I could tell you stories about Tom, but he's a very good friend. He's not doing well right now. He's battling cancer, but throat cancer, which is it's really ironic because a guy that has throat cancer is a guy that wants to be doing nothing but talking on the air all the time.
Just like the rest of us, all we do is talk.
Exactly.
Your association with this program here at UNO, you go back quite a ways with the program and
Right.
with the coaches.
Right, all of them. Mike Palmisano was a wrestling coach. Mike Denny. You can go back. I didn't get here for Al Caniglia, who was a football coach, very, very well thought of. Bob Hansen, UNO basketball.
And people may want to remember that UNO did have a football program back
They
then.
did. And Sandy Buddha was, he would put on a show. On the sideline, he was a wild man. Plus, we used to call him the Riverboat Gambler because he would do things, innovate as such. And one of them was the no-huddle backfield, not the no-huddle, but the no man in the empty backfield. And he had a quarterback by the name of Mike Mancuso. And we were playing Northern Iowa. He said, I got a wrinkle or two. And I said, well, that'll be good. I can't wait to hear this and see it. And they came up to the line of scrimmage, and there was nobody in the backfield but the quarterback. And Northern Iowa called a quick timeout trying to figure out what was going on. So I said, Northern Iowa's going to adjust the defense, and Sandy will call another play. Well, he didn't. They came out and did the same thing. Mancuso threw a 65-yard touchdown pass. There wasn't a defender within 15 yards of the receiver. So he was absolutely unbelievable in what he could do on the coaching field. And competitor, that's a guy you would not want to cross.
And Sandy Buddha was pretty integral into the community. Everybody knew him. He got along with everybody.
He was probably one of the biggest baseball fans around. Played baseball, played for Prep, quarterback at Prep, went to Kansas. That was his downfall. Nobody wins in Kansas, and still to this day, there's one that hasn't changed.
Yeah,
still bad.
right.
That's about it for Sandy. I think he's down in Arizona now as we speak, playing a little golf, living a life of leisure. But if he and I get together, his wife Nancy is a retired school teacher, taught French, and she said, I hate this more than you do probably, because when you two get together, it's a scene. Because it's one of those, pick on your buddy week, and we'll bring up stuff that happened 20 years ago that you'd think we'd both forget, but we remembered. And it's a sore subject with him if I get him in a situation where he can handle it. He doesn't like failure. But he did a thing up here at UNO. They went to a different offense, and he called me in, and we're sitting down going over some pregame notes, and he said, you remember Bear Bryant? I said, well, of course I do. He said, when he's at Alabama, he switched to the wishbone, and they won a national championship, and the rest is history. I said, so what's your point? That's what we're going to do. I said, what? Well, his assistant coach had left, went to Morningside, and they were Tim McGuire, and Sandy came out in the no-huddle offense and the wishbone, and we lost 3-0. So Monday morning, I was the first one in the office and Sandy was second. I said, how'd that offense work out for you?
What did he say?
It was more what he did. I still have bruises. He takes a lot of that stuff personally, but being friends, I've learned to kind of temper my remarks, which is very unusual for me. Usually I say what I think.
Well, Jim, you've done a lot, you've seen a lot, you've talked to most of the people who have come through this town in sports broadcasting. What are your fondest memories? What are the things that really stick with you?
I'll tell you two, and both of them involve Al McGuire at Marquette. We were doing a game up there, and it was on television, and it's one of those ugly games, and it's like 15-10, and it's like they played 10 minutes, and the ball goes out of bounds, and they award it to Creighton, and McGuire gets up and goes, "This is a crock of shit. I can't believe you got, what the hell is wrong with you people?" The official said, "What did we do?" He said, "It's not what you did. You're not calling anything. You gave the ball out of bounds to them. They didn't deserve it." I said, "It's the worst thing I've ever seen. You do it again, and I'm going to get in your face." From then on, I think we were called for about 12 personal fouls and them 0, and that was it. And the most memorable was at 77. And Tom Apke was a basketball coach. We had a regional here, and they're going to play Cincinnati in the championship game to see who goes to the Final Four. And Cincinnati comes down the court, or Marquette comes down the court, and they put up a shot, and one of the guys grabs the net, pulls down, which is normally basket interference. So they called it against Marquette, and McGuire called timeout and went over, took his shoe off and is pounding on the table. He said, "Don't take this game away from me now." And I mean now. I mean, this is important, and you need to really look at that. We didn't have instant replay back then, but the officials conferred, and they said, "Basket good, Marquette wins." And I'm walking out, and Tom Apke walks by, and he said, "It's destiny." I said, "What's destiny?" He said, "They're going to win the national championship." And they did. From that game, they could have been eliminated in that game, but they went on to win it.
But he had all the officials on his side because he intimidated them all.
Bobby Knight, we can name all kinds of people that control the officials just by their personality, and he was the master.
Can't do that anymore.
No. Well,
not with instant replay and everything else we've got.
Yeah, but you know what, though, Neil? I look at the instant replay and the officials gather, and I think, we're sitting at home because we're all armchair quarterbacks. And
Absolutely.
Say, well, what are they arguing about for so long? I can make that call. And then they come out, and generally it's the other way. And I don't know if you've watched any XFL games, but now they have, they mic the officials and the guy that's going to make the decision, and you can listen on the conversation. Because normally, replay, sometimes, or review, will sometimes run 4 minutes, and you're sitting there, they go to a commercial, come back, they're still.
Right.
Well, now you hear exactly what they're arguing about, and sometimes it could be another thing totally different. Might have been, was it a foul before the incident occurred? So I think that's something that may be adopted later on in the NFL.
I think it's pretty sure that that's where it's headed.
I think so too.
There's a lot of discussion about that type of thing.
So it's a really neat thing, and I think the old AFL, it took a while for the AFL to win a Super Bowl, and when they did, all of a sudden the two sides decided to come together and form the NFC, and I think that's just admirable. But that's what happens.
Nebraska basketball, you've been there through the good years, some of the not so good years, some of the great coaches,
sure,
and some of the marginal coaches. Who would you like to say is maybe the best Husker basketball coach you've worked for?
Boy, that's tough. I would probably say Danny Nee.
Colorful.
Yeah. And I tell you what, Mo Iba was not bad. He was a student of his father, but he was a defensive-minded coach. And, any basketball guy wants offense normally. But Danny had the ability. I thought he was, in my humble opinion, I thought he was a great game day coach. And he made adjustments. And, how many times have we all sat around and said, that they never made any adjustments. Why can't they do this? Why can't they do that? But I think he epitomized that instance where he could make those changes. Plus, he could insert a guy at the right time and who would come out of his shell. And he had the best team he ever had was in '91. They won the Big 8 championship, beat Kansas, and they went to play Jacksonville, who had a big, tall 7-footer, can't think of his name. And they got beat 108-100, which was an upset. And everybody thought, including the national media, that Nebraska team could have gone to the Final Four back then. He would have been one of the great ones. Kansas had a lot of them, as you probably know. That's a great environment, by the way, if you've ever been down there.
Well, with Danny Nee, he may have been the best basketball recruiter Nebraska's seen in a long time.
Without a doubt. Well, you know, being an old New Yorker, he could bring those guys in, and that's the other thing. You know, you're in Midwest city, and these guys got along, and chemistry is the name of the game in any sport, and he was able to blend that group together. I'm not sure that he would be the sole reason, but like they constructed a unity council where they kind of judged their own, and so if somebody got out of line, they'd meet and they would decide whether that guy would play the next game, not the coach, which I think has more of an impact.
Did the same thing in football back then too,
Exactly.
didn't they, with the unity council back during the championship years?
They did, and those were great years. Those were really, you know, they talk about the travel, and Husker fans travel well. I don't care where it was with the Sugar Bowl. We would have almost as many people as the hometown team did. We went to North Carolina. Well, actually, it was in Memphis for the Liberty Bowl, and there were more people there from Omaha and Lincoln than from North Carolina, Charlotte.
Because you go back to the days, as we both do, when not every game was televised. You couldn't watch every Nebraska game. So we had the radio, and at one time, 4 networks in the state of Nebraska originating University of Nebraska Cornhusker
Exactly.
football. And if you had a favorite announcer, you could always find them.
Oh, that's for sure. Keith Jackson's one of my favorites. With you know, he covered the West Coast, and he was ABC's Sportscaster of the Year. You know, Keith got his job without a lick of education in broadcasting, and he walked into the station basically just based on what you said, and he said, "My name's Keith Jackson." He said, "I haven't done any play-by-play, but I can do a hell of a lot better than the guy you got on the air right now." And so they fired that guy, got Keith, and the rest is history. He went on from doing Washington games to doing national games, and he's got to be one of the all-time best.
You've also worked with some of the local legends. The name that comes to mind, of course, is Kent Pavelka.
Oh yeah, I've talked about him before. Kent has such a passion for football. I think he's one of the better play-by-play basketball announcers, but his bias creeps in his football broadcast because, you know, you could listen to Kent and he'd say, "There's the handoff, running around the left side, dodges one tackle, dodges another, and a great run, and it'll be 2nd down and 12." And so if you ever listen to the headsets while you're watching the game, which I love to do, then you would say, "Call it the way it happened," and that filtered into his play-by-play. Thank God Gary Saddlemeyer was along to be the even guy that keeps him calm. But basketball, Kent does just a fabulous job, and he does call it accurately because I've been there with the headsets on and listened, and he's right on it. But that's become his passion because he doesn't do football anymore for the Huskers.
Now, watching Kent on the sidelines at a basketball game, it's something to experience.
It looks like a flagman at an Indianapolis Speedway because he waves his arms back and forth, and he gets really animated, and that's just that passion coming out in him. And it's a show in itself. And you know, broadcasters are supposed to keep, especially on the road, keep a very low profile.
Not make a lot of noise.
Not Kent. Kent, you hear him probably before you see him, but then when he gets waving his arms, I mean, he's out of control. But he doesn't even when they're getting beat, you don't hear oh, woe is us. He just continues to call. You can tell he's mad, but he keeps an even keel, and I think that's what everybody wants out of a broadcaster.
We've had a lot of football broadcasters in Nebraska. Have you got anybody in particular that you would say is maybe the best one we've ever had?
Well, I didn't get a chance to hear a lot of Lyle Brenzer. Everybody that I talked to said he was probably one of the best. I think Greg Sharp right now is as good as it gets. I think he's as good as any college broadcaster.
In spite of the fact that he came from Kansas.
Yeah, you had to bring that up, didn't you? Yeah, and I think, but I think that just shows you in a way how coveted a job is at Nebraska doing football or basketball, because it's of course they know what the fan base is like. How about volleyball? I mean, we've set a standard, set the bar really high. I never thought I'd ever dream seeing 8,000 people at a volleyball game, and you go on the road and there's probably 2,000 or 3,000 on the road, and I don't care if it's Penn State or wherever.
They're there to watch
They're there.
Nebraska.
Mm-hmm. And they're knowledgeable. That's the one thing. One thing, probably my pet peeve is the people that call in the talk shows and want to tell them how to run what they have to do to change the offense and defense, and I wanted to know what their background is and what makes them an authority on telling the coach how to do his job.
I think that comes with being a fan.
Yeah, I think it does in a way.
And talk radio gives them that opportunity.
Yes, that's right.
And they're going to take it.
The other thing is, and we haven't seen it yet, and I know I'm kind of a homer. Brett Hoiberg, Scott Frost, both are going to get the job done. It isn't going to be on Nebraska fans' schedule, but you can't bring somebody in like Fred did and have hardly anybody that ever started a basketball game for Nebraska, and that's showing in their record. As we said, good news and bad news is they set a record. They lost 20 games. But
a record is a record.
That's right. Jim? But the good news is, they're still playing. So I'm just really excited about the future, both football and basketball.
What about the broadcasters here in Omaha? It's a different time, different place. Is it better today than it used to be?
Well, I'm probably going to show my prejudice. I don't think it is. I think there is one station that's doing it very, very well. And their Friday night show is like 7 minutes long, which is almost unheard of in the business with news, weather, sports. When I was at Channel 3, they would say, okay, you have 4 minutes. And I'd go, great. Well, then some late breaking story would come in. So you're down to 3, you're down to 2. And I said, I can't do the show with 2 minutes of sport. He says, well, just pick out the top stories. I said, I picked out all of them, and that was 7 minutes. So they can't narrow it down because I need to tell what's going on. But nowadays, I'd say the standards are a little lower. It's just like they're an afterthought. And I always wondered why it's news, weather, and then sports, because the last guy up has to take whatever's left. Now, I don't know.
Or maybe save for serving the best for last.
Well, I hope that's true, but
yeah.
But saving the best 1 or 2 minutes, you might probably have lost your audience by then. Yeah. But in South Bend, Indiana, they don't do it anymore, but they used to lead with 8 minutes of sports off the top, and then they'd get to news, and then they'd get to weather. And weather over there, as you know, is probably a big, big story because of all the snow that comes off the Great Lakes.
Sure.
So, but that just shows you the passion that you see. Here, I'm doing a thing again on Mr. Basketball, Miss Basketball. So we pick out the best male player and the best female player, and it's apathetic. We have to call coaches and ask them to nominate their player, because if he doesn't get nominated, we don't consider him. I don't care if he's the next coming of Michael Jordan. But I quit doing it the year that we had Miss Basketball. She didn't show up for the ceremony. The coach didn't show up, and they didn't send a representative. And that was 6 years ago, and I just sent their plaque down to the school to say, you want to pass that on to the girl. Maybe it's something that she could cherish. And that, to me, tells me. But now I'm seeing the resurgence in high school ball, and I don't know if you paid attention to attendance, but they'll have 4,000 or 5,000 people, standing room only, at a game. And our best players in the state right now are juniors.
And it's not always dependent upon the school's record. I mean, you're getting supporters regardless of play.
Regardless, that's the good thing about it. But I'm a basketball guy, but this town generally doesn't really. Basketball is not the sport. And if you can go to Creighton and see 18,000 people in the stands, probably 12,000 are there to be on display. Mm-hmm. It's a show. They want to be seen in public, and they don't come down to their seats until 2 minutes before tip-off. To me, that's not the basketball fan. Look at Pinnacle Bank Arena. And I'm the last guy, because I'm more Creighton than Nebraska on basketball, but they sell it out every game, and they're in the seats 5 or 10 minutes before the start.
And it certainly isn't a stellar program based on record.
And so, they're there for passion.
We also see that in high school, though. Look at the Millard games in town here. They get terrific fan
Very
reaction.
good, very good. And that was one of our problems in trying to pick out games and sponsors, because a lot of it, Millard, of course, you got a captive audience. There's a lot of businesses in the area that support the programs, but places like North, Central, Ralston, they really don't have a base that they can afford to give the money to the broadcasters. Mm-hmm. If they do have any money, they give it to the Booster Club to support their program, which is admirable. But it's just it's a harder sell.
Plus, you're dealing with the Metro Conference.
Very definitely.
And the conference wants to get equal coverage to all the schools.
They do.
Whether they're terrific or not.
Well, and I'll give you the other story with the Metro. They have their monthly meeting, and of course you've got we've got the Omaha schools, OPS, got the Millard school system, Ralston, Prep, and Marion, and the OPS athletic directors meet 10 minutes prior to the meeting, closed doors, and then they come out. And then, so I was making a pitch to do the ball games, and we weren't paying them any money to do them, and now they're charging a little bit of money. Mm-hmm. And so I would make the pitch, and then I think the guy, I can't remember who the guy was that would pass on the word, so I said, I'll call you Monday and see what the results were. There were 18 schools voting, and he said, well, you got the deal. I said, great. He said, it was 7-6 with 3 abstentions. And so there was not a lot of support there.
Well, I remember some of those meetings because I used to do those as well, and many of those coaches and ADs used to think that radio broadcasts would hurt their gait.
And I remember one of the coaches, or one of the athletic directors said that, and it was Central and Prep playing at Burke Stadium.
Which we're going to sell out anyway.
Where they had 13,000 people there, and they were, most of those, as you know the layout, a lot of them are spreading blankets on the grassy hilltops there. And I was interviewing him, and when he came on, I said, thanks for taking the time. I said, I'm sorry we ruined your crowd tonight. And so I think he kind of got the message that, and I said just simply, first of all, this is a 2-hour free public relations for you on the radio, and you're not paying a dime. So yes, if it's snowing, you're probably going to have a small crowd. But when the sun's shining or it's a perfect night, then you're going to have the fans. I said, we're not hurting your broadcast, or you're not hurting your play on the field with our broadcast.
They're still generating their revenue. When you're doing a high school game, particularly football or basketball, how conscious are you in terms of the listening audience, knowing that you've got parents, you've got relatives, you've got brothers and sisters listening to the broadcast, waiting to hear the performance of their family members on the field?
We get a lot of that attention just by looking down in the crowd, and we can see a lot of people looking up because they're listening to what we say, and I'm thinking, don't badmouth anybody. But a lot of my color guys would always say, don't say anything bad about these guys. I said, well, not saying anything bad, but if they miss a tackle, I'm not going to pass over that. And we did one with Benson. Terry Shelster was a basketball coach, and his son was playing football, and he missed a tackle. And Sandy Buddha was doing the color, and he said, don't mention that name and on the air. And I said, I won't, but he's the son of the basketball coach.
Yeah.
I think that didn't go over real well with Terry, but Terry was a good guy and really a champion of radio broadcasts. He liked the fact that we were out there, just there covering their sport.
And covering their kids.
And the kids, so, why not?
It makes a big difference in terms of the high school experience for a lot of these kids.
Exactly.
That's sometimes the only recognition they get is being on the radio.
There's no doubt about that, and we could do a lot more. In fact, I think I'm not sure you were down at KCAR at that time. We were in the basement, and we were doing a Saturday morning show. Mm-hmm. And again, it's hard for us to judge, and actually we were audio streaming it. So it's kind of hard sometimes to tell, but I always said, if you're doing radio, how do you really know if those numbers reflect who's really listening? Because a lot of times they might have the radio on, but they're in the other room.
Sure.
But with the audio streaming, it measures every click. So you see who was and who wasn't. And, of course,
where they are.
Yeah, and it spiked during the basketball tournaments and football championships.
Of course.
So we knew we were getting through, but it was still before our time. That everybody's now is doing audio streaming. So it's at least, you know, we got the ball rolling. I'm not saying we were the impetus for the rest of it, but I think everybody saw the value of what you can do.
Take the credit.
Yeah.
Take the credit. You guys were the pioneers. And you really kind of were, because the internet was in its infancy back then.
It was, you know, just very much the infancy.
Mm-hmm.
And I even see things changing in that direction, you know, with, you know, social media now. I think it's going to change dramatically. I'm not sure in which direction. I have some pros and cons on it. You know, the fact that you can keep in touch with people you haven't been in touch with, and probably never would be if it weren't for Facebook and Twitter. And but the social interaction is basically gone. I've seen kids in bunches, and none of them are talking to each other. They're all on the phone.
Oh, yeah. That's not going to change.
No, that probably will not.
Yeah, one last area I want to get into with you because of your perspective in sports, particularly college sports. This movement to get athletes paid because the universities are making all this money and the athletes don't get to share in any of that, and now they're going after their names, image, and likeness and getting them paid by sponsors. What does this mean for amateur sports?
Well, you know, I think in a way it's good. I remember, you know, when they first started doing the endorsements, they didn't seek permission. The NCAA prohibited them from using their name recognition. And Jay Billis pointed out, he said, you have stopped the athletes from taking advantage of it, but you are selling to exclusively all the letter jackets and paraphernalia of each school and pictures of the players with press guides. So where's the justice? Well, now that's what got this thing going. So,
and Nebraska legislature is about ready to act in that direction.
And so I think they have a right to, you know, you talked about people, college kids, they get a full ride scholarship, but that doesn't go to their any money, walk around money, any lunch money that they need to eat something else beside at the training table. So I think that's beneficial.
You can't even give them.
No.
I remember a ham sandwich incident with Eric Crouch years ago. You remember?
Yeah, I do.
And that was a violation of NCAA rules.
Yeah, I think that's going to fly. I think the other thing that's happening also is the exemption rule for students who have completed their degree and want to go elsewhere. And I think it actually is beneficial with the new one if it gets passed, where that first year they can transfer and go somewhere else.
And play.
But, you know, coaches can go somewhere anytime they want, and they don't have to answer to anybody. So, you know, you get a guy that, and you know, 17, 18-year-old kids, impressionable, and they probably buy more into the coach and then the university, because that probably, I mean, at Nebraska, it's not a hard sell, except that it's a hard sell for somebody coming from Florida.
Or California.
But if a coach can go, I don't see any reason why the athlete, because the athlete may say, I came here for the coach, he's gone, so I need to go too.
So if you have a coach that's coaching at, I don't know, Central Florida, decides to come to Nebraska?
Yeah, and I think, and the nice thing is he brought his entire staff with him. So, and the other neat thing is, you know, I'm sure you remember it, he also, while he was on the job here, he coached Central Florida in their game with Auburn. And so can you imagine the airplane flights back and forth, the jet lag and whatever? Now that's dedication, and that rubs off on players. So who wouldn't want to play for him?
In case you're wondering, we are talking about Scott Frost, for someone who's not a fan. Well, Jim, our thanks to you, because you have brought up a lot of information that
can't hit
Maybe.
the air.
Well, some of it will. They can't edit everything out. We're not going to suspend you this time.
Thank you.
Jim Kelter has got perspectives and history in Nebraska broadcasting that makes him really kind of unique in the history of where we've been, where we're going, and how things are going to change. Our thanks also to UNO Television for facilities and staff for this program. Also to Nebraska Broadcasters Association Executive Director Jim Timm and Chairman Emeritus Marty Riemenschneider. For the Nebraska Broadcasters Association History Project, I'm Neil Nelkin.